So, everyone has given praise to the video, and I want to thank all of you who put in comments in the video of where in the world can black men find acceptance. And this is a part 2 to that, in which some of you have been asking about where in America can black men find acceptance. But before I begin, I want all of you to look at part 2, if you haven't catched it, of me and O'Shea Duke Jackson on the interview where I discuss why you don't need white people to like you to respect you. So that description will be down below. Also, part 1 to where in the world can black men find acceptance can also be found below. As far as the United States of America, some people will tell you that, well, the United States is all racist and white supremacy this and slavery that, and as those people who state that, I'm not going to put this video in the description because I want you Negroes to find it, and also it's my previous video. You Negroes who complain about white supremacy in America and racism in America, well, you have two options. Either improve your reputation, or you build your own infrastructure. And if you aren't doing either one of those, anyone else at this point who I see complain on my shit, I will call you out. And if you want to make long paragraphs and dissertations, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to delete them and then block you. All that time wasted. So at this point, don't waste my time nor anyone else's time. For the rest of you out there, for everyone else out there, you all want to know where in the world can black men find acceptance? Where in America, can black men find acceptance? And quite frankly, this is a big country. This is a continent country, and not all the places are going to be the same. Quite frankly, you have 48 contiguous states, and then you have 2 other separate states. And as a summary, the more west you go, the more better off you'll be, or the better off you'll be. And just to knock these 2 states down, Alaska and Hawaii. Now, Alaska, yes, there may be a bit of conservatism out there, but the conservatism in Alaska is more or less on the emphasis of smaller government, civil liberties, and libertarianism. And there might be some people out there who may not feel you being out there, but the majority of people are there to work, 2 will probably be glad to make another friend of another gender because of just the nature of that state. And 3, the women, granted, I've heard the talent out there isn't the greatest, but the women out there will see you as a novelty. So yeah, there's that, if nothing else. So, and it's cold in the majority of the year. So if you find some chick who's feeling you, what else are you going to be doing? Now, the best state, and I'm not going to say Alaska's the second best, but it's definitely one of the better states. The best state out there, you've all guessed it, it's Hawaii. And it should be obvious. It's the furthest away from the United States, henceforth it's the furthest away from the Americana culture of just stigmatizing and demonizing and scapegoating blacks, particularly black men, so that whatever can occur and that the real issues and real people who are bringing this country down can go under the radar. So there's that. You're away from that shit. Also, you have the exotic factor of just being on beaches or near beaches. So there's that factor in which puts women specifically more in the mood to date or do whatever. And alongside that, you have a lot more of the Asian Pacific Island influence, which, quite frankly, trust me, it's very open, very mellow, very laid back, and race, particularly if you're a black person, it will be the last of your problems when it comes to that state. You'll have all sorts of Asian Pacific Islander American whites who are away from the mainland, to not have to worry about judgment, as well as other tourists constantly. Now, with that being stated, the 48 states. Let's focus on the contiguous states. 5 minutes already, jeez. So I'm gonna focus this on regions, not necessarily state by state. But let's start off with the worst region, which is the northeastern United States. I know all of you are gonna be shocked when I didn't mention the South. I'll emphasize on the South later, but the northeastern United States, from my experience, has been the worst place for black men, specifically on-point black men, to date. One, you have a lot of just history of immigrants clashing with blacks, and we don't have to go through that. Same thing sort of with Midwest, but I'll explain that in a bit. Two, you obviously have some of the worst cities being predominantly black. Cities like your Newark, New Jersey, your Baltimore, Maryland, and until recently your Brooklyns, your Bronx, your Washington, D.C.s. Those cities, and particularly the leadership and the reputation they have built, have made it hard for blacks, particularly black men, to get any sort of respect in that part of the country. That's why I emphasize that reputation so damn much. Because a part of the fuck up, or part of the fucked up race relations in that part of the country, and in, for that matter, the Midwest, and it is because of blacks. But I'm not going to pin this on the fault on blacks. There are certain people in that part of the country. One, you have your elitist northeastern whites who have never been called out on for their racism, because a lot of them were successful in shoving the attention towards the southeast, which I'll explain on that later. Also, you have your ethnic whites who not only are about putting their race first, but putting their nationality first. You have Italians, Irish, Jews, Poles, whoever, who will flip if one of their sons or daughters dates a non-Jewish, Italian, Irish, Polish, Caucasian. Believe it or not. If you don't believe me, go to places like Bensonhurst in New York or South Boston and just drive around those places. See what kind of mind state they have. And if you can talk to a couple of them without being called a nigger, I'm going ahead. Just as a social experiment. These people are very entrenched with their nationality to the point in which it's almost like, I won't say living in that part of the country, but it's very, very backwards. In a way, it's sort of like the deep north. And alongside that, you have a lot of the minorities in that part of the country. I almost say every other non-black minority outside of Latinos. Your Asians, your not Pacific Islanders, they really don't exist out there. I don't blame them. Your Asians, your Indians, your Arabs, your Persians, a lot of them hate blacks. I'm just going to say it, they hate blacks. And a lot of them do it to impress whites. I'm not even talking about the ones who work in corner stores or bodegas and deal with dusty-ass Negroes and hoodlums. I'm talking about just those who have little to no interaction with particularly ghetto blacks, and they still play that game of hating blacks to impress whites. Now, it is a nationwide phenomenon to an extent that a lot of these minorities pull, but quite frankly, a lot of this is just politics. A lot of this is just laziness on their end, just to get an easy way of just being shielded from racism on their own. And alongside that, let's look at the whites in this part of the country a bit more. Even those who aren't racist, particularly the women, a lot of them are just basic. And by basic, I mean either they're basic SJW, super left, super I'm a feminist, I'm not gonna cook for you, I'm not gonna clean for you, you can do it yourself. My degree should be the only thing that matters. Now, I shouldn't have to work on my work on my looks, and blah 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 blah. You have that, or you have the yellow. Let's go party, Jetty. My dad is in Long Island, and we gotta go 50 miles into the party. Come on, we gotta go downtown. The bridge and tunnel crowd, exactly. Those people. If you want to deal with that, and the bridge and tunnel crowd exists in almost all the big northeastern cities, from Boston to Washington. If you want to deal with that, even if they aren't racist, be my guest. The Midwest. Man, talking about the Northeast just made my blood boil. I'm from Washington, D.C., so it's... You all wonder why I got the hell out of there. The Midwest. Now, you have some issues in the Midwest as well, and there are two Midwest. There's a Midwest that is essentially dying, and not just by means of jobs being taken away and never coming back, but people literally dying. And there is a sense of struggle and a sense of hopelessness, which translates into the most carnal behaviors being displayed. Now you have, how does this translate to race? Well, simply, a lot of the carnal behaviors translate into tribalism. And that tribalism, and it's always been there to a certain extent in the Midwest. Particularly, you have your other immigrants, your Irish, Polish, Italians, Jews, who moved to that part of the country to compete with blacks who moved in the South via the Great Migration to get the factory jobs. That sentiment has remained to this very day, and that rivalry, if not opposition, is still apparent, especially in the Rust Belt Midwest. Places like your Cleveland's, your Pittsburgh's, your Cincinnati's, St. Louis's, Chicago's, even though that there's a whole that's a whole nother subject when it comes to race in Chicago. I mean, don't even waste your time in Chicago. If you're looking to outside your race, just skip Chicago. Milwaukee and Gary, for that matter, skip those places too. Yeah, your Buffalo, New York. I know that's in the Northeast, but that's more Midwest than anything. Quite frankly, these places I wouldn't even bother. These places, even if you find people who tend to be open-minded, quote unquote, you'll find that a lot of these girls that you tend to date blacks tend to have a lot of baggage, have a lot of issues, and in most cases come straight from the school of, or straight from the places where opioids and meth run rampant. And you'll see a lot of them tend to have their own issues of either drug use or come from a broken home, obesity, which you Negroes who date fat women outside your race or ghetto women outside your race, please stop. Please. All sorts of other issues, just poverty, just whatever. And quite frankly, the only reason why I put the Midwest above the Northeast, one, is because you don't have as many other minorities trying to placate the whites by hating blacks. So there is that saving grace. You only have to deal with one opposition if you're living in the cities I mentioned, or in the Rust Belt part of the Midwest. Or there's another part of the Midwest that you could look at, which is a bit better, at least right now. And that are the Great Plains. That's the Great Plains portion of the Midwest, where you have your Iowas, your Nebraskas to an extent, your Wisconsins to a certain extent, especially out in the university parts. Your Kansas, pretty good option, underrated. And I'd say the number one place, at least right now, that I would recommend for interracial dating in the Midwest is, well, if you don't count Saskatchewan and never mind, not Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Winnipeg, Minneapolis, St. Paul, aka the home of Solo TV 84. And if you want to hear more about Minneapolis, St. Paul, and dating and that sort of thing, sub to this channel. Go on ahead. Highly recommend it. As far as these parts of the country are concerned, blacks are still a novelty, even though they are not too far. Even if the cities they live in, like Chicago and Detroit. Oh yeah, Detroit's another. Don't even waste your time in Detroit. don't waste your time with Detroit. Just don't. Or nor Michigan for that matter. Good football, but college football anyway. But Minneapolis, St. Paul, great option. Some of these other Des Moines, good option. I'd say some of the other college towns that are scattered around. Big Ten country, or Big 12, depending on which state you're in. A lot of those cities are pretty good. Can't complain. The issues are that you don't have a variety of women to choose from. It's just, if you like Lily White, then go on ahead. And two, it gets rather cold, so daytime approach, day game for all of you guys who indulge in that isn't the best option, alongside the fact that it's very carb dependent. So, the South. A lot of you all wanting to wonder why I didn't put the South as the number one place for black men not to go. Well, quite frankly, the income disparity between blacks and whites, specifically, in the South, I would surmise, is probably the most narrow out of all the regions in America. That alone, whether it's successful blacks who are in the middle class and doing the thing, or whites who are just as low-trodden as blacks are, or at least blacks are portrayed to be, that right there gives a lot of leverage for blacks to date outside their race, particularly when it comes to blacks and whites. And with the historical shaming of racism in the Dixie South, Jim Crow South, a lot of the southern states, well, not a lot, but a good amount of the southern states, along the international exposure, the move from the people from the Northeast or no, I won't say Northeast, they suck. People from the West, people outside the country, just a lot of the acceptance of certain cultures, a lot of that has changed the South for the better. And I'd say the South, yeah, you can say it was probably it had the least amount of interracial couples, but it has the fastest amount of interracial couples and biracial children born to this day. Particularly part African descent or African American descent. Now, you do have some parts of the South that resemble more of the Midwest, your West Virginias, your Kentuckys, rural Tennessee, Arkansas, but the fact is that the whites in that part of the country, and you can apply this fact to a lot of the Midwest, particularly the Rust Belt Midwest, that a lot of whites in the country, whites in that part of the country, or that sub-region of the Appalachian South, are so poor that, quite frankly, if you're a black man just working and staying, keep your nose clean, then yeah, you can definitely compete just off of resources alone. You can compete off of resources alone. Just have a fucking apartment in a good part of town, and find one of these chicks who are in the trailer parks, who have potential, who don't have kids, who's working some sort of job as a waitress or a community college, and you show her the time of her life, and you will win her heart. Trust me. And trust me, if that Appalachian Smoky Mountain white girl, trust me, a lot of them want to get the fuck out of that shit. And they will go anywhere and everywhere. And they will do whatever and whoever they need to get the fuck out and just to have a better life. I mean, you already see it enough. You have these busted down trailer trash getting with a lot of these dope boys and whoever, and having these, yeah, I'm not going to even go into that, but there's a lot of that happening, if nothing else. But outside of that part of the South, you do have parts of the South that are becoming very international, are becoming very multiracial, multicultural, and are just progressing. You have a lot. I'd say your top states to see this in, I would say, include your urban metropolitan areas within Virginia, within North Carolina, within Florida, and especially Texas. Georgia, my gripe about Georgia, one is because a lot of people I met from Georgia are assholes, just on the personal note. But that aside, and yeah, hell, people here on YouTube, the people who rep Atlanta, I'm not naming names. You know who the fuck they are. They're assholes. What do they deal with that? But that aside, Georgia, when you say Atlanta being the black Mecca, we all know today's black culture is nothing to be proud of. So you have that, plus a rural part of Georgia that's stuck in the 1940s. I'm not impressed. But those other states I've mentioned, your Virginias, North Carolinas, your Floridas, your Texas, a lot of very international, very, they are progressing. They are at least, they're putting in effort to get past the race issue that they have been stigmatized with for so long. Even if it's just with other people coming from other parts of the country that are a bit more open-minded and a bit more forward-thinking. And then there's that. Alongside that, you have the military bases, which a lot of them are in the southeastern United States. And a lot of them are just very open-minded as is. So you will have communities that, even small towns, that are more open-minded than some of the bigger cities that you see within the Deep South. You also have, as I said, the growing population of Hispanics, Asians, Indians, whoever that come from work. A lot of those minorities, from two reasons, don't really get on blacks. They don't really hate blacks, at least as individuals. Now, they may have a bit of caution when it comes to the group, which, as I said, a lot of blacks bring upon themselves. But we won't bash blacks too bad, at least not in this video. But as individuals, they will give you more of a chance than they will in the Northeast. Two reasons. One, considering the amount of white trash that exists in the Deep South, they can end racism that is targeted towards these groups, because these groups have not sort of put the proverbial foot in the ass of Southern old conservative racism. They'll probably be a bit more apt to befriend blacks by default. And the second reason why they're a bit more apt to talk to or deal with blacks, particularly their women, or especially their women, is simply because a lot of them tend to, for lack of a better term, a lot of them, how can I say this? A lot of them have better exposure to blacks, particularly blacks in middle class parts of the state. Now you have, as I said, the big cities, your Charlottes, your Dallas, Houston's, your Virginia, Hampton Roads, to a lesser extent Richmond, Raleigh, Durham to a lesser extent, Atlanta to a lesser extent, Nashville to a lesser extent, and also Florida. It's very international, especially once you get out not Nashville, but Jacksonville. I wouldn't even bother with Jacksonville. Jacksonville's just right up there with Birmingham and Jackson, Mississippi, and I'm good. But your Tampas are good. Your Orlandos are good. Your Miamis are good. Well, problem is you gotta have to worry about some of these, particularly Miami and that tri-city area. Miami, was it Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, where you have some of your Cubans who want to play the I'm white too card. You gotta watch out for some of them. But other than that, if you can learn Spanish, especially once you get to South and Central Florida, that'll help you a lot. So there's that, and also the jobs are booming. It isn't like the Midwest where everyone's just scraping and scratching and clawing to survive. There's an abundant mentality, and when you have an abundant mentality, people are more friendlier by default. So there is that. So the South, despite the historical oppression and animosity it's had towards blacks, it actually is improving its race relations. And I honestly believe that in a way it has done probably the best job in improving its race relations and being more open, candid, and honest about its past, its present, and its future. Now, as far as the Confederate flag statue taking down of whatever, I have my opinions about it. I can make a whole nother video about that if you want me to. Which leaves the best part of America, which I think all of you are wondering, not even wondering, but wanting me to elaborate on why the West is the best. Yes, where I am right now, the Western United States is definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, the best part of the United States when it comes to where an American can black man find acceptance. And it's for multiple reasons. One, the political climate of the West has always been either liberal, and I'm not talking about Northeast liberal, where it's like, you got the gays and the homo and the trannies and the feminists, and we're parent and the aliens. We gotta parent to those groups, but not the blacks. You literally have, you do have some of that in San Francisco and Los Angeles, but I'll explain later. But in a lot of the West, it ranges from liberal to libertarian. And libertarian, the running joke is that if you are a Republican or a conservative who doesn't hate blacks or gays, then you're more or less of a libertarian than you are a Republican. Well, I should have probably said that a bit better. What do you call a Republican who doesn't hate blacks or gays? And there you go. A lot of that mentality is truly abided by in this part of the country. Now, you will have people, particularly in rural, not only say rural parts, but particularly those who don't have a lot of exposure and who the only thing they have to listen to are Fox News and Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh, who will be a bit more anxious about not even blacks, but just non-whites. And the racism that is out here in the Western United States, more or less, is more of a non-white versus white kind of thing. It's sort of like that in the South, but it's tame in comparison, or at least how historically the South was. It's pretty tame. You will see some people be anxious, be nervous. You won't hear a lot of people yell niggers and like you will in some parts of the South, or better yet, some parts of the other parts of the country. But outside of that, a lot of them tend to abide by the live and let live principle of as long as you aren't being a nuisance, as long as you aren't being a hoodlum, as long as you're contributing to society, people will leave you alone at the very worst. Which leaves the other parts of people who are actually intrigued by you. Intrigued by your culture, intrigued by your journey of how you got out here, especially if you weren't born out here. Intrigued by what you do. And quite frankly, the Western United States, I'd say, along with the South, tend to have some of the more friendlier people. Now, you can say the South is the friendliest, and I wouldn't argue with that, but they can get a bit too nosy at times. But a lot of people in the West tend to be friendly in their own way, tend to be cordial at the very least, and tend to be just live and let live people. Which I know all of you are wondering how the women are. Well, quite frankly, blacks overall are only 5% of the population in the Western United States. We have probably the lowest presence here outside of a few cities on the West Coast. There isn't a black population out here. And a lot of the blacks who probably move out here tend to marry outside their race. Historically, the West has been the place where a lot of blacks who have dated outside their race and have had biracial kids, and their kids go on and marry black spouses, and then yeah, the black culture or the black gene tends to be visibly gone by the time you get to their fourth offspring. But out here, it's very carefree. It's very live and let live, and the women especially tend to abide in that philosophy. A lot of them are intrigued by black men. A lot of them are intrigued by just, even if it's like a one night fetish of what it's like to be with a black guy. I've got to sleep with a black guy tonight. He's like the only one in this city, and he's mine. No, you have a lot of that, but you will have a lot of women who are genuinely interested in getting to know you, hanging out with you, being in a relationship with you, or even just being friends with benefits with you, or in some cases, actually taking it to the next level. But as far as taking it to the next level is concerned, when it comes to marriage, you got to be careful, because some of these places, especially in California, it's essentially dangerous for your financial security to get married as a man. But on details on where to go as a black man, in the West, you can possibly have yourself blindfolded and throw a dart anywhere. If you want me to elaborate, yeah. If you like the outdoors, I would say Denver and the state of Colorado is definitely your place. I'd say Colorado itself has always been a historically libertarian state. Not without the excessive liberal SJW shit, at least until recently with the Californian transplants. But it's always been that kind of state which I felt as if we can be conservative, or we were built on conservative principles, not because we hated blacks, but because we really wanted small government. We really want to live our lives. And Colorado and states around Colorado tend to have that mentality. Some of the other states in which, yeah, you can, the Dakotas, yeah, you can throw that into the West to an extent. I would say New Mexico has also been like that historically, libertarian. I mean, yeah. Problem is, there's not much to do. you all in New Mexico know there isn't. Anyway, your Wyomings, your Idahos, your Montanas. As I said, there's probably more to do in New Mexico than there's to do in those states. But yeah, you still have that sort of conservative mentality. But in the bigger cities, or at least some of the college cities, you will have that more of a truly, genuinely open-minded liberal mentality, or at the very least a libertarian mentality, which we all know what libertarian is, as it relates to conservatism and Republicans, as I explained earlier. Utah, I'd say, I want to say it's sort of like Colorado, but it's very theocratic when you consider the